We are ready to get started. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Is everybody ready? All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We can have a roll call with members.
Yes, sir. Sheriff Roy Boyd,
Here.
Chief Jaime Ayala,
I'm here on the call.
Chief Bill Avera, Paul Creast,
Here.
Chief Solomon Cook,
Here.
Bob Ladia, Chief Ronald Phillips,
Here.
Constable Derek Rose, Marvin Riles,
Here.
Chief Derek Watson,
Here.
and John Wilkerson.
Chief Avera just joined us.
Chief Avera just joined us.
Yes, thank you.
All right, then we'll go ahead and get started. We'll move into number 2, discussion and take appropriate action on advisory committee procedural and preliminary matters if necessary. Does anybody have anything with regards to this item here? Tico? Okay. I will assume that everything functions correctly, and I guess when we get down to number 4, I'll have a few more questions with regards to the virtual side of it whenever we go off-site. We'll move on to number 3, discussion, take action on matters related to developing minimum standards with respect to the creation or continued operation of a law enforcement agency based off function, size, and jurisdiction of the agency. It's established under Texas Occupational Code 1701.163. This includes the review, discussion, and any action on. And at this point, I'll yield to Chief Watson for format of documents pertaining to the recommendations by members and the committee as a body. And so Chief Watson, and then get some input from T. Cole, and we make sure they're good. I'll go ahead and yield to you, Chief.
All right. One of the great challenges is this is kind of an unscripted exercise we're engaged in here. And we looked at it from a couple of different standpoints. One was to just create a laundry list of like 20 or 30 items that were required that a TCOL investigator could go in and go down the list and look at it for a facility. And let's just, off the top of our heads, what would we want in a police facility? Property room that's secured, door control, maybe fire extinguishers, fire alarms, access controlled into and out of the facility, a safe to keep firearms, and you kind of get the laundry list feel of what we're going for. And I did submit that laundry list to the chair. The formatting. You know, TCOL has a format that they use when they come in and do inspections. So if you look at the TCOL format for how they set up their the rules, and I'm talking actual specific formatting. How do we want it? Do we want to have line item? In my particular case, do we want the line item property room, and then underneath property room highlighted the subset of everything that would go into a property room? Bins, storage shelves, secure entry, login entry, video surveillance, whatever it is we want a subset from that. So that's one way of doing this and preparing a list. What I'm arguing for, or what I'm asking for, is a consistent application of a format for all of us as we're going through this process, so we present a consistent look. And I would be glad to. Actually, I was a little unprepared to be brought in for it, but I'm good with it. What I'm looking for is a recommended consistent format for us all to submit our documents in. That's one. The second recommendation I forwarded to the chair also was the Texas Police Chiefs Administration has a format for when we do the 173 standards that we audit agencies for. And so we put out the standard, and then we have the behind the standard. We give an explanation of why the standard exists. And certainly, in this particular case, we have the legislated standard, and then we have all the subset standards. And whatever we put as a subset, I would recommend that we explain why that exists, and then we explain what the standards would look like for an investigator or for an auditor on the ground. And I like I said, I did submit that to the chair. I would be glad to submit it all to the committee, to their, well, through the chair to everybody's emails as a potential format. But that's something that a significant number of municipal agencies, I understand I'm coming from a municipal look here, they understand that when they look at the conditions and the standards and then what the auditor is going to look like, it says something we can meet, standards we can meet. When we were looking at physical facilities for a police department, you know, it brings up, and we kind of need guidance, because it brings up a lot of questions about, there is a minimum standard, obviously. You need a training room, you need training records, you need secure facility. But then the next step is, are we going to address what are the minimum standards for an agency with a PSAP located in it? And what does that look like? Do we mandate generators for the 24/7 staffing of the PSAP? And then the third question would be, and consistent with this would be, what do facilities look like with, and I know I'm bringing up a lot of stuff, what do facilities look like with a jail or detention facility attached? And I would always yield to jail standards for that. And I actually would just reference jail standards and leave that alone. But I guess first and foremost, what sort of format do we want to be presenting as a committee for our rulemaking? Does that make sense? Well, that's a lot of words, sorry.
Yeah, Chief, I think, I always go back to, I've got a captain that says that we create a product for an end user, and that end user is a district attorney. And I think we're doing the same thing here. We're providing a product for an end user, and that's TCOL. And so that TCOL can turn it into a usable product for what they do. And so I think that you're right. We need to ensure that whatever it is we provide, that it is in a format that functions for TCOL, so they spend the least amount of time having to reformat it and do all the busy work that comes out as a result of it. So I guess we'll kind of lean on them with regards to how they want these things to look, because this is something that we don't normally deal with, you know, providing TCOL with this, but that's what we need y'all's input to make sure that we provide y'all with the product that's going to be usable for you. So the last thing we want to do is burden y'all with a bunch of paperwork that's going to just add to your caseload.
Sheriff, what I would ask, or I think would be wise, is to get a template from TCOL that they want this
I agree.
information formatted in.
And I think your point is really important, and ultimately the goal is to generate a rule here, right? It's a rule that will be adopted in our rule book, Sheriff. And so that's what the final product that you need to draft is. But exactly, but if you want us to generate, and I think what he's suggesting is how we would actually apply that, what the worksheet would look like, so that you can see what the end result. I think the points he made are really important. Is the agency know what to expect and what is that gonna look like? We can work from your draft rule if we have time to generate what the form we would use or how we would implement that, if that's gonna help kind of make everyone illustrate better how it will be applied.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Would that help with what you were talking about?
Absolutely, in my opinion, yes.
And I think that's fair. I think it's just gonna be an expansion on what we're already doing, but once we have a draft of the rule, I think we can generate how we will apply that. And that would help maybe find where you wanna revise or change the rule.
I know you've got some input on this.
Yes, sir, Sheriff. First, I apologize for being a little bit late. Legislator's office kept me tied up a little bit. So I actually have something I'd like to email to one of y'all. I worked on it this morning. It's on the funding aspect of it. And the Sheriff, I apologize. I wasn't able to respond to your email saying I'd take care of that part of
That's
it.
okay.
Or would take point on it. But the way I have it formatted is just like you see with filed legislation. So on this one, I believe it's 211.16. And so the new language will be underlined. The old language that we're gonna remove will be struck through. And so I've got a draft on that. If I can get one of y'all's emails, email it to you. Maybe get
John, can you
some
send it?
copies printed of it real
We can't
quick
put
and
it up.
hand it out to everybody. You'll kind of see what I've been working on with that. Who am I sending it to?
If he sends it to the advisory, can you access it, Sarah Beth?
I don't have my computer up, but I can go get it.
Okay, that's fine, just send it to the advisory, that's fine.
Send it to the advisory email? Okay. While we're doing that, Constable Rose, if you'll turn on your video, we do need to have your video on to consider you appointed in the meeting. I think it's just advisory@tcole.texas.gov, or is it advisory committee?
It's just advisory at TCOL.
Okay.
While they're working on that, I think Chief Phillips had a couple recommendations with talking about, some of the things we need to be careful about is getting so far into the weeds with this that we basically get off track of, what the legislative intent is. And I'll talk a little bit about what I've discovered on legislative intent, but you want to talk about that, Chief?
And that was my question. When we're looking at developing standards and we're breaking this down, how far, do they want to get, the way it's written is so general. You could, I was talking the other day, it almost covers shotguns to socks. It's
certainly
just
could.
so general. If we could narrow that scope down. I have an idea of what they were looking for, and it was certainly not that broad. But,
Sure.
But that's the way it's written. And I'm sure they want the minimal equipment, minimal training type stuff, and that, but I wanna be sure, like Sheriff does, you get what you need.
Yeah.
To get it, and you're not burdened with stuff that's just fluff.
We appreciate that. I think a concept and I think it goes along with what's been said so far is coming up with a general standard for every agency. And obviously that corresponds with the resources that corresponds to the number of officers which they have appointed, of course. And that's across the board for every general principle for every agency in the state. However, based on, and as the statute says, adjusting that to type of departments, to sizes of departments and things of that nature. Because I think the further in the weeds you go, it's going to start excluding maybe unnecessarily departments that aren't meeting, that it's putting requirements that go beyond maybe what are reasonable and necessary for that particular department to maintain in order to be effective and responsive to the public and to other law enforcement agencies.
And that's what I was looking at.
Certainly.
And that's my concern for the small SBLE departments. I don't want to be so broad that the school-based law enforcement agencies get caught up in something that they're not in a position to abide by, and we're in that in that time.
Certainly, and I think that's important. I know some of the data that you all have in the report that was sent out, and it's something to consider as we move forward. The types of departments, let's say a district attorney's the investigators in a district attorney's office going to have different needs than, let's say, the Houston Police Department. Always using that as an example. As we've talked about already, I think that's the challenge of this particular committee. I think the nuts and bolts are pretty straightforward, but figuring out what nuts and bolts apply to Harris County SO versus one of the SOs in West Texas or municipal police department, school ISDs and everything in between, and all of these marshal's offices and things like that. You have a wide variety. And really, I think the practical, everyone should have X, Y, or Z, the physical things that they need. It's kind of easy to come up with that list, but as it applies to each type and size of agency, that's the difficulty with this committee. That's the hurdle to overcome. They can certainly be done.
Yeah, there's no magic slipper that's gonna fit everybody.
Exactly,
So-
exactly.
Okay,
Got a question
go ahead.
regarding that. So I sent out and I've talked to the TPCA and they put together, they have their accreditation standards, about 186 standards, something, you know, in that neighborhood. But in anticipation of the mandated accreditation for agencies at 20 and over, they put together that list of 65 standards that I sent you a couple weeks ago. So would it be practical to take that list of standards, you know, just something, if we could agree on the, whatever those are, you know, that the TPCA agrees to. And then, as you guys are talking about, in a column, articulate the types of agencies that there are. Okay, like schools, marshals, large municipalities, sheriff's departments, et cetera. And then have to check, if you're this department, you need these things. If you're this department, you need these things. You need, kind of like when you're getting your, okay, it's open enrollment now, right?
Yeah.
And we're all going through our open enrollment process.
Yeah.
And same kind of, what do you want, you know, what do you need? Because my needs are different than a family with a bunch of little kids.
Certainly.
And so I don't need all the dependent care stuff. But if we had something that's a simple, here's some standards. If you're this guy, you need these. This guy, you need these. This guy, you need these. And if we can agree on that, I think that's kind of, I don't know, it sounds hopefully not oversimplified, but I don't want to reinvent the wheel either.
I do think that we're going to have to lean quite a bit on TCOL for that, because what I don't want to do is, what I don't want is to have 20 different, I say 20 different versions of inspection that overburdens the staff at TCOL as they go out and do what they need to do in the field. So that's something we're going to have some pretty good discussions with, because, you know, I've got to take this packet to this agency, and then then this afternoon I got to go to this agency, and I need to go down a whole different checklist. And so I think that's a good idea. We're just going to have a good discussion on the logistical aspects of that from a field inspection perspective to ensure that it doesn't cause a problem, because there's going to come a point where we all know that TCOL is going to have to grow in order to accommodate things, but we don't want to push so far so fast that we force that growth in a lag time that puts you all behind and burdens you beyond what you already have. But I think that's a good idea for us to look at.
I have a question regarding that. You know, we all have different agencies. We're all different type of training providers. And when we do the training audits every other year, I'm held to a different standard than you are. Than you are. You know, we're all held to different standards.
Sure.
Right? And so, you know, we're not an academy. We don't do certification training. And,
Right.
But, and so is that already in place somewhat?
I think we can make the concept that you're talking about work, along with the mindfulness of what the sheriff has discussed. I think if we're intentional about making sure, I think we can follow with whatever audit processes or agency process that are necessary. I think that can certainly flow from the discussion you are having and the direction you are going. I feel pretty comfortable, and we'll certainly be able to say, if administratively it's something that can't be done, we will certainly let y'all know so that informs your decision making. But I think we can accommodate both of these concepts as we move forward, certainly.
The core problem that you're both addressing is that one size does not fit all. Like we are reminded of that daily, and our efforts to address one group hurts another group. So we're always looking for that balance. And Paul, your example is a good one. And constables have different training than sheriffs have, than chiefs of police have, than officers have, than jailers have, and that is difficult for us, but we've been able to automate and create systems that make that manageable. Where it gets challenging is then they add a new law that everybody has to get trained on interacting with deaf and hard of hearing, and they have to do it within the next 2 years or 2 years of life, and they create this rolling window, and that's when it becomes unmanageable for us. So there are things that we can spot that will make it unmanageable. I don't think doing different types of checks at different agencies will be that bad, as long as it's clearly defined by the agency type, which is recorded with us and does not change, and we can do that the same. If they're updating certain information on their own every year that they have to report to us, and that form is different for agency, we can automate that. We won't see that. We'll only see the results of that. So those things are manageable. It's when those things are gonna fluctuate and change over time, that's when it gets really difficult and challenging for us. So most of what you're talking about, I think we can do relatively simple. And like John said, we'll spot the things that are going to change over time that will be a specific challenge, and then we can point those out. But I like your idea of like a matrix, because those agencies can self-identify their type. It's listed in TCLEDs, it's defined, and it's not going to change, and they will know that that is their type of, those are their requirements. And the FSAs already know, they understand, they deal with different types of agencies, they understand that a county attorney's office isn't the same as an independent school district. The files they keep, the way they do things are different, and the way they do an inspection will be different. And that's a manageable.
Certainly, and I think a visual representation of this first could be how we base the verbiage and the prose based on like a visual representation like you're talking about. It sounds like either using a vertical concept, you have a wider variety of, you have a wider, longer list, I should say, of requirements for certain type of agencies, and that changes as you go down. And perhaps some agencies that more specialized or smaller in nature as a general proposition, not based solely on size, but specialization, may have much fewer than this top or this tier up here, just as an example. I'm just visualizing this the
Standards
best I
on one
can.
side, type of agencies across
That's
the
right,
top.
and
check,
do it
check,
left
check,
or right,
check.
whatever, but yeah.
And he actually made me think of a really important point. So that is easy, types of agencies. When we start talking about size of agency, that's where it'll get really challenging. If you say 5 people or fewer, then it's, do I have 5 appointed today? Is it the one at my average for the year? What if I cut everybody loose before I get inspected? Like, I can fluctuate and change in there, and that's gonna make it really challenging. Are you talking about full-time officers? Are you talking about all appointees? Are you counting jailers and telecommunicators? So if we start trying to gauge the size, that is going to be far more challenging than just the agency type.
That's certainly a variable that in consideration, as the statute, I think, even refers to size of agency. But I think agency type and the specialization of the agency, it seems like looking through the statute and just from our perspective, if there's one thing we can certainly add to the discussion, is certainly agency type probably speaks to more of what requirements are necessary than necessarily the size of the agency.
No, we talked a little bit about that, I guess offline after the last meeting, the fact that we all know that at some point accreditation is coming.
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, things are changing, and so those are some of the things that we're just gonna have to look at. Well, like I said, we just have to work close with TCOLD and ensure that what we do doesn't cause any issues, and it's not recommended in a manner that's gonna cause y'all unnecessary work or issues as we move forward, because that's something we have to keep in mind. Is what we're doing, put an unnecessary burden that doesn't provide a benefit. And so we have to make sure that we, keep all that in mind as we move forward on this. All right, does anybody else have anything on that? I guess we'll come back when you have your documents. And then, if not, then we'll go to any guidance regarding legislative intent as it pertains to minimum standards for law enforcement agencies. I've only received feedback from a couple of offices out of the Capitol. Everybody's been busy as a result of the ongoing legislative session that keeps getting called. And so they have a lot of other irons in the fire right now. But so far, the feedback is they didn't really have anything specific. They just wanted us to look at the same 8 requirements that are in the rule book, the handbook that is there. And so I've asked, are there any specific issues that you've seen that you want addressed as a legislative body? And I've expressed to them that our goal is to ensure that we meet the legislative intent. And so far, what I've received back is, well, we just want you to look at. So I have not received any input that was what I would call constructive. So as I receive additional input, then I will pass that on and let everybody know. So if there's anything specific, I'd be more than happy to pass it on. But at this point in time, there is nothing specific. And so I think it's gonna be up to us and TCOLD to sit down and make determinations of where the issues are or where the, lack of detail is so that we can move forward. But if I get something else, I'll most definitely let you know. Go ahead.
Sheriff, I was at a lot of the meetings during the legislative session, with the Speaker's office, Chairman Goldman's office. dealing with a lot of what the legislative intent behind a lot of this is. Mr. Beecham, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the issues that was identified, I believe it was that, was it 2036, that interest group? One of the issues that they identified is the fact that we have so many different law enforcement agencies in the state of Texas. And that TCOL does not have the ability, when you have an agency that's trying to get created, that TCOL doesn't have the ability to tell that entity, no, you cannot create an agency. And that's kind of a little bit of the intent, is they're wanting TCOL to have the ability to have those standards, so that way if you have an agency, small municipality that's trying to develop an agency, and they're saying, well, we can fund this entire department based off citations that they issue. That's one of the intent. John, am I missing the mark on that? That's
No,
kind of what
I think that's a great point. That was certainly brought up during the discussions. I think you also have, that was certainly during the course of the session, and you look at HB 3, that's something to take in consideration well, is the desire to have someone armed on every campus in the state is a consideration as well. That's certainly been our direction for the commissioners in discussion, is we get applications for police departments coming in, that there's also that desire as well coming from the legislature. So I think it's kind of one of those age-old dilemmas. Where do you draw the line? Well, put it in the right place. I think that's kind of what we're faced with, is certainly to the degree that you have a smaller, under-resourced department, is there a way to ensure that they have a standard that they have to meet, or to make sure that it's a fair standard so it doesn't unnecessarily exclude them for an underserved area and things of that nature? So it's kind of, you've got the two certainly separate, I guess, they're not conflicting. You look at them together, but there's certainly two certainly imperatives coming from the legislature. You've certainly identified one of them.
I know we discussed that a little bit in the first meeting, because I know that's one of the issues that we really need to address, is the fact that, we looked at your application process, and at this point, basically, somebody fills it out. There's no real matrix to make a determination on whether or not they need an agency, or whether or not this is places trying to provide themselves with a law enforcement agency for purposes other than legitimate. And so I think if we can, as part of that, I know we discussed, maybe we can come up with that matrix and work with TCOL to ensure that we give y'all some teeth, because right now, if y'all turn them down, they go to the TCOL commission, and there's no real matrix by which they make that decision. It's just based off of the arguments
Check all
from
the
either
boxes.
side. Yeah, it's, it depends on what the arguments are on each side, where I agree with you. I think there needs to be some sort of matrix that you can check off and go, you don't meet this, you don't reach whatever the score threshold is in order to legitimately, require a law enforcement agency. And maybe TCOL then recommends, well, you contract with your local police department, or with the sheriff's office, or with somebody else in order to move forward. So, does anybody else have any other input on that? Not, you want to go over what you have here
Yes, sir.
real quick?
So just, yeah, real quick, and this is based off of that legislative intent that we just discussed. And listening to a lot of the conversation during the last meeting, I think that we need to keep in mind, at the end of the day, if you have a local law enforcement agency that's going to be created, the stakeholders in that community, AKA the citizens, they have to have some skin in the game, right? They need to be well informed. They need to know what those elected officials are doing there at that local level. And so in doing some research, there's actually an article that I came across put out by the COPS program with DOJ. And I know they're not everybody's favorite, but they actually have a nice little article, little informational piece where they went in and they interviewed, or they did a survey with a bunch of agencies that created a law enforcement agency. And there's a big portion of them that came back and said, well, we didn't have the appropriate funding to begin with, because they based it off of grants and a bunch of other things. So what I did is I went down and I sat down, I looked at Rule 21116, and just going down there, one of the things that's suggested through that COPS is that, for one, you have a strategic analysis that's performed. Do we actually need a law enforcement agency? And then what data do we have to support that decision? And that's put in here, under that new language under, B1, you have A, B, C, D, and E. And then also, under 2, the statutory change that came out of 1445 added the word sustainable funding. So I added sustainable in this rule. And then there's a suggestion there is highlighted, part of the problem that you run into is, again, these smaller agencies that are trying to fund their police department off of citation revenue. And I think that this committee would be well in place to have some kind of metric that's there that says, you can't budget more than X based off citation revenue. If you're gonna be trying to show that you can have sustainable funding for the police department, I really think that that's gonna be an important factor on that, because, I see some agencies out there that, like, told everybody here, I'm mayor of the town I live in, our budget for our citation revenue is like $50,000. I was looking at a town the other day that's smaller than us, and theirs is $300 and something thousand. So it's, if you don't put that metric in there, then you may have an issue with that. So, and then added, as far as resources, just a suggestion that to consider, not only the physical resources available to officers, but also mental health resources available to officers and telecommunicators employed by that law enforcement agency, right? That's, and then also down there, a new number 5, right now it's in there, a description of the physical facilities that's there, but including the evidence room, but you can put a description, and my concern is if TCOL, if you get an application and it describes the evidence room, but it doesn't show that it's actually secure, and it doesn't show that safety measures are in place to keep somebody from breaking into it that are reasonable, can you actually turn down that application?
We actually do an on-site inspection, so they actually verify that they have something.
Gotcha. And when we were talking about the accreditation, I tell you, a lot of law enforcement agencies, their evidence room, smaller ones, their evidence room will not actually meet the accreditation process because they have the hollow walls with no roofs on there. And then people can just climb right over, right? So that's gonna be something that would have to be addressed.
I think there might be some of the problems with some of the school districts. School districts are notorious for wanting to do shared facilities. They want to have the police department on this side, IT on this side. And what you just said, they're not going to secure that room properly when you be able to go up, through, and down into it, okay? So it's really going to be able to explain to them what a facility needs to be.
Yeah, and I remember when we went from CALIA to Texas Chiefs Police policy standards, I remember that was exactly one of the things that we had to go in and take a look at was the evidence room, not the main evidence room, but where we temporarily stored evidence.
Mhm.
We had to go in and upgrade those facilities for that exact reason.
And this may actually be a good opportunity, Chief, like you were talking about, the school districts, they want to consolidate, they want to make everybody use the same things. With the rulemaking process or the recommendations to TCOL, this may be a good opportunity to start moving some of these policy and decision makers into doing the right thing. If the school district loses their ability to employ a police department because they're not reaching these standards, or if a municipality loses their ability to employ a police department because they're not, the governing body is not meeting these standards, then to me, that is part of the legislative intent that I was hearing at the Capitol, is that if the employing governing bodies are not doing the right thing and giving the resources to their law enforcement that they need, maybe they don't need to have a law enforcement division, right? A police department, marshal's office, whatever the case may be. So a lot of this, and this is just to get us going, get us started with something. And then, let me see, so, and that's why you see down there the new F. It would require that any entity making an application for a law enforcement agency would have to submit proof to the commission that the governing body of that entity held at least 2 public hearings to specifically present what that analysis is that shows the need and sustainable funding. And then they would have to present that to TCO before TCO could even explore issuing that certificate.
If you don't mind real quick, I'll ask, have you thought about, and maybe you already know, but that strategic analysis, are there specific indicators or that you would want in that strategic analysis that would meet the minimum threshold of what they would need to look at as something that we could use for TCO to have a little bit of teeth? I mean, would there be a specific form? Is that what you're looking at? That they would have to go down almost like a checklist that for their strategic analysis of their needs?
Yes, sir. So on page 1, where you'll see B1, strategic analysis identifying the current law enforcement services available to the community. The additional demand for police services such as notable increases in crime or calls for service, plans and data-driven projections for future growth of the community. The law enforcement agency will provide law enforcement services to the fiscal resources of the entity and the impact funding a law enforcement agency will have on other services provided by the entity. And then note in there, in determining the fiscal resources, the assessment may not include potential grants which may be available to law enforcement agencies, because if they pad it up with a bunch of grants and say, oh, you know what, we can apply for the COPS grants and get 5 positions. Well, that's great, but what happens when the funding goes away? And that was actually one of the issues that was identified in that DOJ study, showing that agencies were becoming developed and then that grant funding ran out and now all of a sudden they can't keep the officers.
Well, if you remember, and that's a great point right there, that came out in the original F5. That was a region for the original F5 wandering officer crises. There was a chasing of federal grant money across the state, and the one particular officer that set off the whole F5 process in the Panhandle, that was one of the factors that led to that officer moving around, and it was identified by the legislature as contributing to the overall problem. So I think that's a great point, and that's you also, the language in the statute says sustainable resources, as aside from a one-time grant, quick pop, and you can't obviously sustain the FTEs over a 5 or 6 year period if you just have a 1-year grant. But that's in the DOJ study you mentioned, that just reminded me of the F5 process as well.
Yes, sir. And this gets us, this just gets us started, Sheriff. One thing about it is this is not going to be applicable to every agency out there, because take, for example, sheriff's office is constitutionally protected or constitutionally enabled offices, constable's office the same way. But for ISDPDs, for municipal police departments, marshal's offices, municipal districts, water districts, all these different districts that want to start up a police department, what this language will do is it will make them look at what do we need to create this department, and in all actuality, what are we going to need, and not fluff it with a bunch of grants and broken promises. And they have to present that to their stakeholders, the citizens that would have to pay property taxes in that area, and say, hey, this is what this is going to cost to make this program work. Have 2 public hearings on it, have the governing body by record vote say, yes, we decided we're gonna move forward with the application. And then that gives something additional to TCOL saying that, hey, they did this, they notified all their citizens. So if they want a police department, they're gonna have to maintain it. And if not, they're accountable to their citizens that voted them in. So that's kind of the foundation of it.
Another thing in school district law enforcement, in the education code, it specifically states that the chief is supervised by the superintendent, not a designee. But in some of your districts, you still have, well, I'm kind of busy, so you answer to the chief financial officer, or you answer to the principal of the high school. And it really, really impairs the chief's ability to run his department the way that he should run it. And it needs to be more teeth in that, because so what if the superintendent does pass the buck? What happens then? We need to let them know, like, hey, you cannot do this, okay?
And college is that exact same thing, except they pass it off to a VP. Instead of reporting directly to the college president, most of them is the VP of, Administrative Services. Some have even been the VP of Student Services, which I hadn't figured that one out yet, but it does, but it gets you far enough away from the president where you lose control sometimes.
Yeah, and the chiefs are kind of caught in a bad position because they don't want to push the envelope too much on it because the superintendent said, okay, you know what, this job is too much for you, you know, why don't you go somewhere else, okay? And that will happen.
I encourage y'all to think of this in the context of, traditionally it was the standard to create an agency, but now it is an ongoing standard. And that I think there should be some,
Yep.
you know, every year, 2-year reporting requirement, and then you should have to report the structure of your agency, who the chief reports to, right? What that governing body is and who that person is with authority, what their projected staffing model, how many full-time, part-time reserves are. Some of those things should be reported each year. So you as chief don't have to point it out, but if you're not reporting to the superintendent, the documents that you send to TCOL shouldn't say that you are, right? That's up to them when they sign off on that and send it to TCOL. I think this section you have highlighted about the sustainable funding source is a really good example of, you might be able to convince me to set it up, but in your annual report, I want you to give me the last 3 years of income derived from citations and projections for the next 2 years, right? You might be able to sell it for a year or two, but you're not gonna be able to sustain that funding source in that manner. And that's where that's gonna show up. And I think that's really what they wanted in some of these committee meetings when they were in. A, do they have a real need for a police department? Why are you giving them one? Well, because we don't have criteria to tell them that's not a real need. We're not gonna argue with people over that detail. And then B, can they really sustain an agency in the way that they're operating? And we haven't had things that we can look at. That's what would mean the most to me is, where is the actual threshold? I think that's what the sheriff was getting to. In your list up here, additional demand for police services such as notable increase in crime. We had no crime last year, we had 10 crimes this year, that's a notable increase, right? But is that really, the sheriff's office took all those reports and made arrests in 3 of those 10 cases, do you really have a need for a police department just based off 10 calls for service because you had none the year before? I think identifying some of those thresholds, or at least having them create measures that they're going to update annually, will allow us to see whether or not they're actually using the police department as it was intended to be used.
Yes, sir, and that's a hard target to hit, to give the commission, you know, that standard and that metric. And again, I would fall back on, at the end of the day, you know, these smaller agencies, their governing bodies need to be held more accountable. And giving the commission the ability to hold them accountable is gonna be detrimental in this.
Well, I'll use the jail standards as a good example where, you know, when we have our annual jail inspection, the jail inspector comes in, sits down with the sheriff, the jail commander, you know, your jail administrator, and then also sits down, usually asks for the judge and one commissioner. And when there's problems with the facilities and the money doesn't exist to keep the facilities up to the minimum standards jail standards has, then they tell the judge and the commissioner, you are legally responsible. And you're the ones that are supposed to provide the funding in order to ensure that this place operates at the level. The only issue we have is there's no teeth in it. It's just them telling them. And so that's something that maybe we're gonna have to look at. Because I will tell you, when it comes to this 20% of the funding needed to support law enforcement, you know, from revenue derived from the issuance of citations, that, I know that there is already some legal language out there, because if I'm not mistaken, if your revenue exceeds, I can't remember, it was 25% or where there's a threshold, then the Secretary of State has the ability to come in and seize all of your sales tax indefinitely. And they've actually done that to a couple towns. And the only reason I know that is when I was asked to help look at the formation of a police department in a small town, just like you're saying, I asked, how are you gonna pay for it? And we're gonna write tickets. I said, well, that's, first off, nobody's gonna like your town. Remember Kendleton. And second off, the state's gonna come take your sales tax. And like, what do you mean? And so I may still have those documents, because I had a whole notebook that I put together. And I'll look for it and I'll grab that and do some research and provide it, because you're exactly right when it comes to that. That's something that many small towns think it's a cash cow that's gonna bring in revenue. And so that's something that I think needs to be addressed, because more often than not, that's what I see them thinking they're going to fund a law enforcement agency with, is those tickets that they're gonna send people out to write, which, as we all know, coming from law enforcement, if I give you a quota and tell you you need to go write 20 tickets a day, then I've just increased the odds of us violating somebody's constitutional rights, because I've basically put your job at jeopardy if you don't write, Paul here a ticket today. And so at that point, we're no longer enforcing the law, we're trying to generate revenue, which is not what we're here to do. So I think you've hit the nail on the head with it.
And just to go further clarification on that, Sheriff, I vaguely remember reading that law that you're talking about. I want to say it's a third. So if you look at the entire budget of the city, only a third of that can come from citation revenue. After that, everything's supposed to go to the comptroller's office, and that's to offset, the supplanting of the budget on citations. But even with that, I think we need to take it a step further and say, okay, let's say you've got, just for simplicity's sakes, you got a $900,000 budget for a small city. And that $900,000 budget, $300,000 of it is citation revenue. Well, that's a lot of stinking tickets out there. But then at the same time, if you restrict it lower to where they can't max out at that 33% to fund that police department, they're gonna have to put some commitment from property taxes, sales taxes, franchise fees, whatever, then that will help put that buffer in place to keep it from getting there. I was at a council meeting in a different area or a different council a few years ago, and the mayor literally made the public statement that she's gonna have to downsize the police department because they haven't been writing enough tickets, bringing in enough revenue. So, and that leads to what you're talking about. Now you got officers going out there potentially violating rights because they're trying to keep their job.
And when you're looking, I don't know how to address it on the county side, but as a sheriff, I receive zero revenue from tickets. But the JPs are always concerned, and I see this in a lot of counties, the JPs are always concerned because that's where a lot of their revenue comes from. And so you'll see in a lot of small counties, the justice of the peace and the county judges getting together, trying to put pressure on the sheriffs to write more tickets to bring revenue for those offices. And so, I don't know, that's something, there's a whole matrix of that we're gonna have to take a look at and see what we can do to ensure that doesn't happen, because like I said, the last thing you wanna do is violate somebody's constitutional rights. And what you're talking about here, you're exactly right. That's the slippery slope that winds up leading to somebody getting their rights violated or a really nice lawsuit coming down the pipe, so.
One of the things that I've liked about ISD is that they're not revenue driven. However,
Zero.
pardon?
I say we get zero.
However, in the past, I don't know if many of you are aware, but school district officers cannot write school offenses. Disruption of transportation, disruption of class, because of the so-called abuse that was taken away from us to be able to do that. If we want to follow someone for disorderly conduct, we've got to do a complaint packet on that. And there have been some municipals, agencies, courts that have tried to entice ISDs to put their tickets in their courts, and they would let them borrow radios.
Yeah.
We have an abundance of car radios there that we'll loan y'all, okay? And they tried to entice them in that way. And once upon a time, I know one agency, that's basically how they got their police radios. But a lot of that stuff is going away because it was not right. But I'm afraid it could start up again.
Incentives are there.
Elephant to eat here, isn't there?
If the incentives are there, you'll see
Somebody will
the,
abuse it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why we gotta put these roadblocks up to say, hey, no.
Yeah, I like what you've done. I think maybe we're gonna have to sit down with T-Cole and figure out how we create a matrix by which they can give some sort of score on this and see if there's some tweaking, or, I'm sure y'all will have some input to help out, because while we have the best of intent, we don't always have the internal knowledge that y'all do to make it function in a manner that's gonna benefit y'all and put a little bit of teeth in it. I think that's one of the things that we're gonna need, is to be able to put some teeth into whether or not somebody can receive an agency.
Volunteer you, but I'm willing to work with you to try to get that matrix like you're talking about with the basic standards put. If that would be a helpful starting point, and we can send that out, and then I think being able to break that down by agency type will allow us to start to establish some of the specific criteria that will apply in some of those areas. But I think your idea has to happen first, to kind of be able to cite the differences between the agency types. Would that be helpful?
Sure, yes, sir.
Does anybody else?
Talking about to create that matrix, particularly for the agency size and tasks.
Right, like looking at the list of things that the legislature wants us to be monitoring, and then which agencies those apply to and which ones they don't apply to. And then where they would vary. I think some of them will vary depending on the agency type. But I like his idea of almost like a chart, like when you pick your, when you do your open enrollment. where
Right.
You can look across and see, okay, all these would apply to me, all these would apply to him, and I think
And
that.
some of the basic stuff would apply to everybody.
That's right.
Exactly.
You know, the basic stuff would.
That's right.
And I think,
That's right.
Chief Watson and I had talked basically about that, and I think now I've got a better feel for what we're looking for.
And the sustainable funding, it might be a little bit different. It would have a definition in each box depending on your agency type, what it requires, because as the sheriff pointed out, sheriffs are funded differently than municipal police departments, right? So there might be a slightly different standard, but when you look down your column, you'll see where everybody has something in that row, but yours is different.
Because even just like when you go for accreditation, like my agency, it was easier for us to do it at our size, we have 50+ officers, versus an ISD who has 3 people. You know, you can't compare
Yeah.
a cherry to a pineapple, okay?
Right.
Yeah.
Like you and I were talking on the evidence room, if my agency gets one piece of evidence every 2 years, that's exceptional.
Yeah.
We just don't, I mean, knock on wood, I'm glad for it, but it just doesn't happen. So it would be hard to get, like you're talking about, an evidence room that's secured, that'd be hard to justify.
Well, that'd be work too, so.
You know, hard? Yeah. Matter of fact, I'm about 51% down. Yeah, I'm hard.
I think TJ sent y'all the statewide commission law enforcement agency composition data. And on the front, you've got 15 or 20 or so the types of agencies and the numbers they are statewide. As you go through it, you'll have and we did it by TCO region because that's the best way we can accumulate the data by region. But that just gives you in the purposes, it gives you the basic idea right now. You know, from all the way from 800 municipal agencies down to you're starting getting into county attorney's offices. We have 54 of those. Airport police departments, 8. Port authorities, 5, and obviously that just those few examples right there give you an idea of the varying needs and the resources that are available to those departments to execute those needs for the communities they serve. So a lot of variety and diversity and types of departments there.
I think maybe like, especially somebody like you see with Water District, maybe Port Authority, it may be advantageous for us to reach out to them and say, what do you feel is the minimum your guys need to do their job? So we don't, sitting in here, I can come up with stuff for a Port Police.
Mm-hmm.
but
Right.
It may not fit what they need.
That's right.
And then you worry about the funding on that,
Right.
because they are funded by, somebody told me this years back. They're funded completely different than anybody else is.
Port Police are, they get federal funding, they get a lot of different areas. And most of them have a Port Authority
Right.
where all the ships that come in and all that pay a docking fee, for lack of a better term, that goes into Port Authority that goes out to pay for all the different services. It's complicated.
I know we've done some work with the Port of Corpus, Port Authority, and they have a police department, and a few of those guys that work down there worked with us at the Victoria Police Department years ago, so I can reach out to them and.
And like I said, I retired from Galveston PD, and there's a,
Yeah.
who's down there, I know most of them.
Excellent.
real quick, Sheriff, on this packet, you and I talked about it before, but for everybody who didn't hear us, these numbers are, of course, ballpark numbers, as he pointed out, there's 254 sheriffs, not 253. One of them is categorized as a railroad down here at the bottom, it's been fixed.
Maybe they got fired.
The size of agencies changes and fluctuates, the number of agencies changes and fluctuates, but these statistical averages are gonna stay about the same. That a vast majority of our agencies are very small agencies. And the types of agencies doesn't change once an agency is assigned a type, it doesn't change. So it helps you to understand the different categories that we're looking at and the size of those.
Appreciate it, because there's some of those that I never even thought of, some of the types in there. Just
We can
never
work-
come to mind.
And putting those on that matrix, did anybody else wanna work with us, or do you want to see what the two of us can come up with and kinda go from there, or?
Yeah, I think if the two of y'all come up with something, then if there's need be, we can kind of tweak it from there. That way we don't get too many cooks in the kitchen at one time. Let's at least get the basic, basic formula down.
It will give you some options. Everybody can agree on the standards on the left column. And, that'll be.
This is Bob Lydia here. When we talk about raising funds, and when we talk about different departments increasing tickets and so forth, we have to remember a lot of departments are giving tickets to people who can't afford it. Some of these people are not doing what they are accused of doing, and so that will increase discrimination. That will increase a division within the community. So we don't need to encourage them to use a ticket citation to increase. If we can give money to other countries and so forth, we need to find another way to increase our revenue.
Yeah, I believe that's, kind of where we were headed at, is we want to ensure that that ticket revenue is not the basis by which law enforcement is funded.
That is correct, but we need to talk to people in the community. We need to get law enforcement people in the community together so that we can figure out a different way, because I know as a citizen and private investigator, in a lot of cases I've looked at, there are people who have gotten citations that did not deserve them. But if we let the department tell them they're not writing enough tickets, then we're just helping them create a division between the people in the community and law enforcement.
And I think we'll get into that when we get into the upcoming dates and locations for meetings, because I think that's one of the things we're gonna want, is to try to get as much public involvement, law enforcement involvement as we can, so that we can have these discussions in a place that's more local, so that people in the regions can come and talk about these things and kind of comprehend what we're looking at and provide us with input from all different directions.
So,
Yes, I understand, but to put a pin in it, to remind the department, let's not go out and write citations and tickets and give people at this point in time. Let's figure out a different way to do it now, and then we can get into it. It may be 6 months, a year from now, and we're writing citations and tickets of people who really can't afford it.
Yes.
So, sir, if I could address your point, I agree with you in a large part, but the primary goal of law enforcement in administering tickets shouldn't be to raise revenue. It's to encourage voluntary compliance within the communities that we serve. And that's driven by police department policies, how their officers enforce the laws. And I think that a police department's policies should reflect the values of the communities that they serve. And so in talking how you're discussing right now, it's really important to have those community members articulate what's important to them and let the police department know, hey, this is where we live, this is what we need, and not necessarily, and a lot of police departments are staffed by officers who don't live in the communities they serve. And so I really think it's super, super important to have the community, as you're saying, buy into the policies of the department and how they're going to enforce traffic citations. And not just picking on people because it's easy, you know, not just going to a particular neighborhood and writing expired registration violations because you can bump up your number, you know, it's just not fair.
Now, if I can add this, also, one of the things that we do as a chief, you know, we empower our people to go out and enforce those laws. And we give them the ability to use their discretion on what they think should be handled by court action, what can be handled by warning. And I agree, it has been abused by a lot of agencies, a lot of people. But that's the reason why we have racial profiling report now. So if there is a pattern of an officer who picks on Asians, it flares up. Or if he picks on African Americans, or if he picks on only females, that pops up. I've seen that evidence of that. And that's one of the good things. I'm glad that we have the racial profiling report now that we mandate that we have to do. So that's a measure that tries to help ensure that people aren't being picked on because of their race, sex, or whatever it might be.
Any further, Mr. Lydia?
No, I just wanted to remind you, I think if you are the committee and you know, I can go in other neighborhoods and I can ride around and there are no officers giving out citations, and these people are violating the law, running stop signs, speed. But I can go in certain neighborhoods in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and they're parked behind trees, or parked behind bushes, and they're writing citations, and they continue to do it. Not saying that these people have not done wrong, because I've looked at some of the videos, and some of the people who accuse them of doing it, they're just as wrong as the people who are doing it. But we need to get together and come together. The better they are in the community, it helps us, and we don't have to have the budgets. We don't have to have the community will work a lot better if we treat everybody as an American citizen.
We sure appreciate it. We thank you for your input. You know, because we don't believe that we should be writing tickets just to generate revenue, because that's gonna wind up violating somebody's civil rights. And that's the last thing we wanna do. All right, I guess, next we'll go into, unless anybody has anything else, I apologize. Anybody have anything else on that? We'll go to the statutory considerations, I'll go ahead and put you down on number 2, is that right? That we're on, sorry, you don't have one, but, if you'll look at your statutory consideration spreadsheet, I emailed it out this morning, just for those who would not be here. But take a look at that and see if there's any changes that need to be made. And I think Mr. Wilkerson did a really good job of providing a good way for us to spur those discussions and take a look at those. And so if you are good with that, or if you see something that needs to be changed, or you want to jump on or get out of, let us know so we can make those changes and we can push forward with, start coming up with some recommendations to bring to the meetings for some discussion and for TCOL's consideration. I know under number 8, other standards for consideration, I think, I know on mine, I put down the matrix for the creation of an agency that we'll need to come up with. And so, once y'all have the document done, the chart that you are gonna to build based off of, you know, agencies types, then from there, we can start looking at that and confer with TCOL to come up with something that might work for them, that gives them a little bit of, you know, something to lean on. Does anybody else have anything on the considerations or somewhere where they wish to
You put me
participate?
down on number 6.
Number 6.
Yeah,
What's that? All right. If there's nothing else on that, we'll go to number 4. Discussion and take action on further advisory committee meeting dates and location, including video conferencing. You should each have a sheet that has the dates, times and locations on it. Just based off the committee's recommendations, we put them all on Tuesdays to start off. Like I said before, I think as we get closer, we come into January, we'll probably have to add some dates in order to fine tune some things. But I know that our next one would be November 28th at the Alvin Community College.
That's right.
December 5th would be online, of course, unless you want to come here. I guess we'll have it here at the T. Cole office. And then December, I have 2 agencies that have volunteered to host, and that is the Kerr County Sheriff's Office and the Randall County Sheriff's Office. So one's in Kerrville, one's in Amarillo. So, and that's, I know that Amarillo says they can do February 6th or December 19th. Larry Letha out in Kerrville said to just let him know what we need and he'll get it worked out. So I know now, do any of y'all have a recommendation? Yes, sir.
I was gonna say, I'll volunteer my agency also. We have a facility that could house this and do the video
Okay,
also.
okay.
Somebody can go.
So I know we're gonna be up in the Alvin on the south side, so we could, is there a particular one you would like to do? And then I'll work with Larry to figure out a date.
Whatever's open,
Okay.
I'll take.
So what we may wanna do.
Yes, I think when we look at February 6th, we look at Amarillo, we need to look at the weather as well.
Yeah, it might be cold up there. Bring 2 jackets.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe virtual.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be more concerned about the roads being drivable.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we could do that one December if y'all wanted to. And just to avoid the possibility of February weather, since we all know that February is the coldest month of the year around here. Is that okay with y'all? And then would you be okay for February in Humboldt?
Yeah, February will be good, yeah.
Okay, if y'all want to pencil that in, so.
I just flew up to Amarillo about a month ago for a TPC executive board meeting. And I would hate to go up there in the hard, cold winter, okay?
I've been there when the wind's blowing 50 miles an hour and the
Yeah.
temperature's 30 degrees, so.
And I flew up there because that was a hell of a drive.
We've been up there in January a few times as an agency and it's
Fun.
a little chilly up there that time of year.
Sheriff, you have here DFW area
Yes,
to be determined. We have a
so,
really good relationship with DFW Airport Police, and I've heard
Yeah.
a lot of good things about their facility.
It's a great place. We've done commission meetings there.
okay, if we can,
And we also have an ISD, Dallas ISD is offered, and I wanted to host it at a school district if possible.
no, that, I understand that completely. I think that would be a good idea, Chief.
And so that was gonna be our designated school one up in that area, because there are a lot of school district police departments in North Texas.
Okay.
So it'll be in conjunction with DISD.
Sounds good. If you'll get us an address so we can put it on there and I'll start filling in the addresses.
Yes, I'll send it to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. If you want to get us an address for up there as well.
Okay, well,
And then, we'll get that put together. Because I think one of the things we need to talk about is exactly what Bob mentioned, which is, we need to advertise our schedule and get it out so that, chiefs of police, sheriffs, different law enforcement agencies and the public can also participate, because we want as much input as we can. So I know we could get the Chiefs Police Association will put it out. I'm sure TMPA will put it out, CLEAT will put it out. I'm sure that the School Districts Chiefs Association would put it out, the Sheriff
We'll
Association.
put it out.
TML.
TML's put it out.
Tico will too.
Okay. And then I think at that point, then we're gonna have to lean on our public members like Bob to make sure that we get it out to the right people in the communities and ensure that we have public participation. And so I know a lot of our law enforcement agencies have public organizations that they work close with. We just need to make sure that we get it out to as many people as possible. So, because, I mean, what we're doing is gonna impact a lot of folks. We wanna make sure that we give them input ahead of time. So, but once I get this schedule finalized, I'll send it to everybody, and then we can start our advertising on where all the meetings will be. So, and then I'll get with the Kirk County Sheriff, because right now, other than Amarillo, we have nothing in West Texas. And I sat down, looked at the map, and once you get past Kerr, it's a whole lot of road between each jurisdiction. And so, and I kind of didn't think anybody'd want to run out to El Paso for the day. So, but I figured Kerr would be a good spot because you could catch everybody around San Antonio. And also if somebody wanted to come from, say, San Angelo or something, it wouldn't be too far of a trip.
This is Bob again. If we could get something that we could put in our hands, something we could send out through on the computer or so forth, whatever, that there are a lot of meetings that I attend, and we could actually start spreading this information about what we're trying to do in the different communities, especially in Dallas-Fort Worth area, just to get them involved and just get some feedback.
As soon as I get all the addresses finalized, you'll receive it in an email, and you'll be able to move forward with getting that out, Bob.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. We appreciate it. Also, I guess we'll need to sit down with your IT and make sure that wherever we go has the capacity to function in a manner which you require in order for this meeting to take place. I guess this is Microsoft Teams, is that what it is?
That's correct, Sheriff. And I think and this is what I wanted to ask of you all, the plan is for everybody to go in person to this site, or the majority of the committee go to the site?
As many as possible, and those who can't make it online. Yes, sir.
And the important differentiation for us is public interaction will occur at the site,
Yes,
and
yes,
that the online is only to facilitate the members of the committee that can't be present.
yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
And then in an effort to meet the open meetings, everybody needs to have their camera on and participate in the audio. The idea is that any members of the general public that were here could see and interact with those that are on the screen, just like they could if they were here in person.
Excellent.
So that would be the expectation going forward. I can get John and we can work on a list for you of what each site would need
Okay,
to facilitate that, but as long as it's just restricted to them, then the other big component is that we need to record those meetings. We publish the meetings on YouTube later. So someone there would need to also record the meeting so that we can publish it later.
all right, sounds good. I'll get with those folks in remote locations and make sure. I will tell you, I know it's a pain, but the reason I want to kind of go out across the state is just what Bob was talking about, the maximum amount of input from all across state, because the needs in South Texas aren't the same needs in the Panhandle. Needs, in West Texas aren't the same needs as the Piney Woods, and so we got to kind of get as much input from different areas as we can. Some things are the same, some things are different. We just need to get as much input as we can, so.
Sheriff, before we move on to number 5, which I anticipate is what you're going to do, I realize here on the agenda I failed to provide you a moment in which y'all could review the minutes from the previous meeting, and I believe this would be an appropriate time to do that if you think so.
Excellent, thank you.
Yes, sir.
And you could categorize it under agenda item number 2, Sheriff. Thank you, Sarah. Add that on my list here. Thank you.
That'll work. Everybody had a chance to read the minutes? If not, then I'll give you all a few minutes.
Sheriff, what was the earliest date that y'all were talking about from here the soonest date for a meeting? Did you say December,
No, it's November 28th.
November
It'll be
28th?
in
Okay,
Alvin, November 28th.
got it, thank you.
If I can get with your IT guys, get my IT guys and them, you're talking to them, all that.
All right, so y'all had a few moments to go over. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes?
I'll accept the
Okay.
minutes.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Take your pick. All those in favor? Aye.
I,
Any opposed? If not, motion passes. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for putting them together for us, too.
Sure, no problem.
So number 5, receive public comment on any topic without action. Is there anything that we have? Anything from T-Cole?
Sheriff, just one programming note, since the meeting is scheduled for 11:28, we'll have a deadline to publish the agenda by 11:20, so you and the APO will have it prior to that, but I just did want to make you aware of the deadline.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. So if anybody has anything that they want to ensure is on that agenda ahead of time, make sure to get it to us so we can get that out. Anybody have anything else before we close? 11:20. If not, I just need a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
I.